It's often exciting to look to the future of UNO, what it might be like in times to come. Sometimes, though, it's important to stop and take a good look at the past of the university, the people and the happenings that help make the excitement of future history possible. With this in mind, join me for Reflections in Time. Often it's interesting to look to the future of a person, an organization, a college, and a university. But often it's important, too, I think, to look at the past. Some of the reasons why I'm able to sit in this beautiful new building here on the UNO campus in the summer of 1982, for example. And so we, a few years ago, started here at the university what I like to refer to as Reflections in Time. And what I've asked are a variety of people to join me and sit and just visit about the university, about themselves, about their past, some observations about the university and its people as they see it. And today I'm pleased to have a friend of mine of long standing and a member of our staff for such a long time here, retired just a few years ago, Mr. Ernie Gorr. Ernie, glad you could come and chat this summer of '82. Take you off the golf course, but we're making do with a few hours' time, right?
Well, since it's kind of a rainy day, Paul, I don't think I would get to play anyway, so it worked out beautifully.
You know, Ernie, you and I have known each other for a good part of 30 years, I guess, but I don't believe I've ever asked you, and I do not know, about some of your early roots, as we often say in recent years. Where do you hail from originally, Ernie?
I'm a native Nebraskan. I've lived in the state of Nebraska all my life. Born and raised in St. Edward, Nebraska.
Oh, and have you lived other places other than Omaha during the time, of course, I've known you?
Oh, yes. After I graduated from high school...
At St. Edward's?
At St. Edward, and active in everything that the high school could have.
Were you?
A person to be active in.
Did you get into sports in those days?
Oh, yes. In fact, I campaigned to have high school football.
Oh, they hadn't begun it yet.
They didn't have any high school football.
What sort of sports did they have?
They had basketball.
Yeah.
Then we started track. We started track, and of course I was a track man. I ran everything from the high hurdles to through the mile.
Versatile performer.
It was interesting.
Small school, I suppose.
Yes, I remember St. Edward had a sign on the outside of town, population 1,001, not counting the dead ones, and I thought that was awful.
After high school, did you move somewhere else?
Well, I went to, I had to stay out my dad died when I was 2 years old.
Mm-hmm.
My mother never remarried, and of course World War I came along, and she worked for the Union Pacific. All the men in town were gone, and so she was hired to be a telegrapher. We came down to Omaha on the train, and that was a great experience, and she learned her lessons in telegraphy. So when I was in the high school, or in school then, I had to learn to work. My mother wanted me to take music, so I learned to play the trombone and the piano.
I was wondering where you got started with the organ, which I know you played in
and then eventually some singing. And I started an orchestra. We had a fellow who played the saxophone. His name was Lancelot Swallow. Well, Ernie Gorr wasn't a very musical name, and in those days a musical name was important, so we called it Sir Lancelot and His Knights. And it was a 12-piece band. And we used to compete with, I'll drop a name, Lawrence Welk. Yeah. We used to compete with him for dance engagements. And, it was a great experience. So
What kind of music did you play, generally?
Oh, jazz music, naturally. So I was trombonist, vocalist, occasional pianist and manager of the band. But then came time, I wanted to go to college. I wanted to be a medical student. So I just had to break up the band. And two of the fellows who played for me, I called Lawrence Welk on the telephone and said I had two terrific musicians, and would he please give them an audition? He did, and they played with Lawrence for up until in the 60s.
Is that right?
It was, I used to see these fellows on Lawrence's programs playing the instruments. Just a little anecdote.
Oh, great. I wasn't aware of all this, Ernie. That's interesting stuff.
I don't tell about everything.
No. Well, and then you decided, as you said a moment ago, you wanted to go to college.
Yeah, I went to Nebraska Wesleyan because a couple of other my high school friends had gone down there, and of course I was out of school. And I competed in sports, in track, football. That began to interfere with things. I had to work my way through school. I worked, and of course this is the Depression hitting.
Yeah.
And I worked at any job that I could find. And I even, during the winter months, I'd shovel a block or two of snow for a lady who lived across the street from where I was staying. And I got a quarter for it.
Well, but it wasn't a corner lot.
It was a corner lot. And, but that quarter made the difference in whether I had a noon meal or sometimes.
It was that tight.
It was that tight. I sang in the Wesleyan Glee Club. We toured all the central part of the area. I was in drama. Fraternity brother of mine, his fiance, and I, we did little one-act plays around Lincoln, women's club meetings. Theater in the round, just sitting in a place like this, and we do these short plays, just the two of us. They give us $5 for it, so that was fine.
That'd buy a lot of lunch.
And then I belonged to a fraternity. There were 4 fellows in the fraternity, and we formed a little combo. A drummer, I was the pianist, the sax player, and a trumpeter. And we played for frat dances around Lincoln, pick up extra change. That probably was the first of the combos, the small bands.
Mostly they were big bands. This was a little band.
This was a little band.
Yeah.
Played in small places.
And you were in demand?
Oh, yeah. We picked up quite a bit of change for it. Then, because of the Depression and money was so tight and I wanted to finish up, I had my pre-med requirements all the way, so I decided I would go transfer down the Lincoln campus and get some education courses. So I did that the last year and graduated in the depths of the Depression and went out to teach school.
Where did you go in the depths of the Depression? Were there many jobs?
I had 2 choices, Johnstown, Nebraska, way up north, and Alvo. And I took Alvo, even though the salary was $10 a year less.
What was the total salary, do you remember?
Yeah, very much so. $720 for 9 months.
With no board and room included or anything? That was it?
Nothing. $720 for 9 months.
Were you able to make it?
Oh, yeah. And then the next year I got an increase in salary, and I had a good... See, I was principal and coach, and I had a good basketball team. And, second year I was there, the little town of Avoca. Of course, Alva was a little town, too, but it was kind of a consolidated school. They beat us in... we beat them in the county tournament, but they beat us in the district tournament. There was only 2 classes, Class A and B in the state at that time. They beat us 2 points in an overtime period.
Wow.
Went on to win the state. 2 points in overtime. So
that's a hard one to take.
somehow or other, my name got circulated around, and one Sunday afternoon, a woman who was to be my wife and who lived with me for almost 30 years before she died suddenly here in Omaha, we were out walking with another couple on the dirt roads surrounding Alvo. One Sunday afternoon, a car drove up, 3 men in it. "Which one is you, Gorr?" Gorr. "We want to talk to you." And that developed into an interview back at the high school, and they offered me $1,100 to come up to Duncan, Nebraska.
Now, that was quite an increase, wasn't it?
Oh, yes. I was at board and room with the superintendent of the schools, and that night I told him that I was going to leave. I had accepted a contract at Duncan, Nebraska. He says, "How much are you going to get?" I said $1,100, and he got up and left the table. We got sick to his stomach, because that was going to be $200 more than he was getting. So I went up there as principal and coach, and we had 2 terrific basketball teams. And again, that 1-point stigma in basketball followed.
Got you again, huh?
We lost to Creston, and they won in the final second. The guy well, incidentally, the fellow who did it is Irv Peterson, who coached basketball in Nebraska Wesleyan for years. He grabbed the ball. It had just bounced off of my player's foot, who looked up at the clock, and they lost the ball, and Irv grabbed it and let it go, and it bounced up, down, 4 times, and it went in.
Oh.
And they beat us 12-11.
Yeah. And if people,
that's a basketball score, 12-11.
But in those days, the rules were a lot different, weren't they?
Oh, yeah.
A lot of center jumping. And
yeah, we had center jumping. That's when basketball was fun, needed a little strategy.
A lot of defense in terms of emphasis, wasn't it?
Yeah. And it was fun to just work out strategy off of center jumps. I was lucky. I had some tall boys, tall in those days, like 6 foot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, did you stay at Duncan for a long time?
2 years. And then Bridgeport wanted a football coach, and I went way out to western Nebraska.
Ah.
Well, we had some good football teams and basketball teams, and again, that 1-point stigma in basketball followed. 2 years later, then I ran into H.K. Doffett down in Curtis, Nebraska, and he said, "I'd like to have you come down." So I went down there as assistant in football and coach in basketball, and again, the 1-point stigma. It hurt. I never had a team go to the state tournament, but in all of those years, 8 teams went to the state tournament. 2 of them became state champions in basketball.
Well, that eased the pain a little bit.
Yeah. When I was teaching here at the university, Paul, that Curtis basketball team is kind of interesting because it brings a little sidelight in on sports. I used to write the season of basketball, what it was one year at Curtis.
Mm-hmm.
We played 17 games during the season. We lost 15. 14 of them were, and I say, "What kind of a season was it?" "Oh, God, that must have been awful." I said, "Well, it was kind of sad." But 14 of those 17 games were lost by 1 point.
Oh, my.
And one of them was by 2 points. What kind of a season was it? Well, I put a different light on the matter.
It was close to being a very good season.
That was a lesson that taught me that it was playing the game. You could win and lose, but the stress of winning was tossed into a balance.
Mm-hmm.
The kids played the game. They said, "Well, are we going to win by 1 point or lose by 1 point?" They had a good philosophy about it.
Well, I tell you, Ernie, we're recording this in the summer of 1982 in segments, and we've come to the close of our first segment, so you and I will take a little pause here.
Gosh, I talked too long, didn't I?
No, you didn't. We'll just pick it up in a moment and go on with some other things. We're getting close now to the University of Omaha, aren't we?
We're getting closer
right.
and closer.
We'll take a pause. Sitting in the beautiful faculty study in the new Health, Physical Education and Recreation building here at University of Nebraska at Omaha. It's the summer of 1982, and very appropriately in a place like this, I'm visiting with a man who had much to do with health and recreation as a part of our UNO, University of Omaha, Ernie Gorr. We're into our second tape. Ernie has been taking us, as we've been recording here, through his early years and through his very interesting years as a coach and a teacher in various places in Nebraska. Ernie, I think when we paused to change tapes, you had us at Curtis, Nebraska, am I right?
That was right.
All right, let's pick it up there.
Well, then World War II came along, and I had an offer to go to ordnance plant in Grand Island. I had quite a science background because of my pre-med. And, incidentally, Paul, I never went back to medical school because I enjoyed teaching and coaching so much. I passed all my pre-med requirements before I graduated. But here with all that chemistry background, I had an opportunity to go, and the salary is quite a bit, so I left Curtis at the ordnance plant for about 2.5 years, and then I got the itch to go back. I was training coordinator there. It was a position I created with the president or head of the general manager, whatever they call it. And I got the itch to go back in coaching, and I had a chance to go to Ponca, Nebraska after the football season had started. They didn't have a coach, and they needed one, so I went up to Ponca, Nebraska. We had a good year, and then a friend of mine, who was superintendent of Nebraska City, Lowell Welch, called me up and said, "We'd like to have you come down and coach Nebraska City." Down in Nebraska City for 2 delightful years, and then I ran into Verge Elkin one day in Bus Depot in Lincoln, Nebraska.
Was Virgil then the athletic director?
Verge had just been hired as the athletic director.
Had you known him from school or previous days?
Oh, yes, I knew Verge from school. See, I was older than he was. He came into college after I did.
Yeah.
And Cardwell came out of Seward High School down at the university, and here I'm graduating, see, before these guys get out. And then Bird said, "Why don't you come up and talk to President Roland Haynes? I think you'll like it." So I took the bus up. I didn't have a car all these times. I wouldn't drive a car as a high school coach because I couldn't afford to. Couldn't afford to have a car in the first place, I guess. And I remember sitting in the corner of the administration building in President Haynes' office, and he put his feet up on the desk and just visited. And I thought, that's unusual. The president of the university puts his feet up on the desk. But he was a grand old fellow. He offered me the job. And so I came up here in August of '47.
What was the job?
I came up as just physical education and assistant coach. There wasn't much on the campus then.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, what are your first reflections on what you saw around here and so on? What was it like?
Well, the field house was in the planning stage. They'd broken some ground.
This year would have been, what?
1947.
Yeah.
They had the administration building, 2 Quonset huts, one of which just south, and then the building just immediately south of the administration building, that was the student shack or student gathering place, and the Quonset huts. And the Quonset huts were for PE.
This area where we sit in Hyper Building.
This was all, well, of course, part of it, where we are, that was, we're just off of an area where the field house was. We had tennis courts, and just wasn't much there. But came the field house, and I began to have a hand in some of the planning and redirection. I just didn't like the idea to have that big peaked roof that's on there so they could kick a football in it. That caused a lot of heat waste over the years, but then that's neither here nor there. Those things happen.
Yeah.
Then I became track coach, and after the field house was built, they started indoor track. And that was interesting.
Indoor track was not a terribly common thing, was it?
No. And we started high school indoor track. That was the pioneer of high school indoor track. In our indoor track competition, we competed against Kansas State, Wichita, Drake, Iowa State.
Oh, wow.
Because I had a philosophy, you run with the big boys, you run better.
Uh-huh.
Then came the development of the NAIA, National Association of Intercollegiate
beginning
Athletics,
of that organization,
which was grown in basketball, but they were growing in track.
Mm-hmm.
So we became affiliated with the NAIA. Well, we competed in the national meets, and we did pretty well. I had the idea that we should have cross-country. Cross-country long-distance running was beginning. I tried it a little bit around here. We did a little bit in intramural, so incidentally I became intramural director, too. We tried a little bit of it. I'll drop a name on Gordon Severa.
Yeah.
He was my first long-distance runner.
The first?
The first.
Ah.
To compete significantly.
Yeah.
The cross-country grew. We got the national I created the national championships for the NAIA. And there wasn't anything in the NC2A, National Collegiate Athletic
They weren't even
Association.
doing it.
Oh, yes, they had their cross-country.
But they didn't have...
But there was no place for us.
Uh-huh.
And there was no place for the small... In fact, the NCAA just ignored the smaller schools.
It had mainly...
They wanted their money, but they didn't provide any program for them, and that's why the NAIA was a suitable place. But the two organizations were in conflict with one another. The NC2A didn't want the NAIA to exist, and there were some interesting things that came out of that. But in fact, I think the NC2A, I found out indirectly, they were trying to get me fired from my job here because I was building a program that was in conflict with theirs. This I found out in a roundabout way, but neither here nor there.
So, really what you're saying here, Ernie, among other things, is that we were really just beginning to do some of these things as you began them.
Well, the University of Omaha gave me a chance to create. And when I came to the university, Paul, I was criticized by some of my high school coaching friends. What do you want to go to that two-bit school for? It's nothing. It's not even a good college. And I remember the very emphatic statement, it has no place to go but up, and I'm going to be a part of its growth. And I've relished that thought, enjoyed it ever since. And to see the growth that this school made, and I was a part of it.
You know, those first years when you came in the 40s with Virgie Elkin and Lloyd Cardwell and a variety of other people.
Don Plaster, Harold Junk, Tom Brock, Charlie Brock.
Some of the, along with these people that you mentioned, what were some of the programs? When a young man or woman was coming out to the University of Omaha in those days, what sorts of things could he or she major in, as you recall? What kind of programs did we have?
The first thing we had, first and only thing, was a physical education major, and Burge gave me the responsibility of revitalizing the course programs and teaching physical education. So I initiated a couple of new ones. One, athletic injuries, their prevention and treatment. That was a pioneer course as far as the nation was concerned in colleges. And incidentally, that might be the beginning of collegiate training programs. Wayne Wagner was one of the early students in this program, and Wayne is now trainer. It was the beginning of sports medicine because in my past experiences, doctors knew little about sports injuries. And I used to push through the doctor friends of mine that something had to be done. That was one phase of the program. And then I saw a need for something else, because here I was, I had a background in music, drama, sports, and physical activities. Recreation had, as a major program in colleges and universities, was completely new. I think there were about 6 or 10 in those early years. And Ralph McClintock, who was superintendent of Parks and Recreation for the city of Omaha, and I were visiting one day down in his office, and he said, we need a college course in this area. And that was where we pioneered again. We introduced some courses, but I had an uphill battle. People said, we don't need any more physical education courses. And this wasn't. So some interesting things went along with it. I created the first collegiate course, called it Recreational Games and Sports, for men and women to participate. The first time we offered it, we had nothing but women. Canceled it. Next time it was all men. Canceled it. Third time I sold it, and the course has been great ever since. But that gave women, men and women, a chance to participate in certain kinds of physical activities, enjoy the competition together. That was, well, it was an understood no-no for a long time among the males.
In those days, as you began here and pioneered some of the programs that you describe, Ernie, it wasn't too common, was it, for women to get heavily involved in things athletic, was it?
No.
It was mainly for men at that time, wasn't it? The games that we played intercollegiately and also intramurals, right?
In fact, part of the women's restriction was, that goes way back into the 20s, and I can recall it quite well, that women didn't want to get involved in competitive sports. It wasn't for them. Dear old Mabel L down at the university, now long retired, she's in her 90s. We visited about it, but Mabel well, ties in with the AAU, and well, that's another thing that I was actively involved in. A friend of mine started Junior Olympics in Chicago, and so we had the first Junior Olympic program outside of Chicago, right here on the track. And there again, we gave young girls their chance to compete in sports.
Did many of them try to?
A few. But it grew from there.
Yeah. But it just wasn't considered, as they'd say, very ladylike, was it, for women to be involved in these things?
That's right. But
why do you think it changed? Why do you think it changed?
They changed because people create a new idea for them to do it, and if that gets the selling. Look at our society. We have continual things changing, but the basics are always there. Yeah. And so we just improve upon what has existed. And Paul, that's why the backgrounds are so important, because people can take something out of the past and build on it for the future. That's all we've ever done. To ignore history and to ignore the past is just radically wrong, because what one experiences today is history tomorrow.
Someone has said there's nothing new under the sun, and maybe there's a bit of truth in that.
Oh, yeah, there are some things that are new. But they basically are really improvements upon what has been.
Ernie, we're running out of time again on our second segment.
Gosh, I talk too much.
No, you don't. That's what we want you to do. And let's pause now for a moment and let our technicians have a chance to reload the machine and we can have a little rest.
Okay.
And we'll visit more about the programs and the people and the things that you can remember of our University of Omaha and University of Nebraska at Omaha. We're beginning our third segment of tape with Mr. Ernie Gorr, recently retired member of our faculty and staff here at the University of Omaha, and of course more recently is the University of Nebraska at Omaha. And we're visiting, as we have on the other tapes this morning, in the summer of 1982 in the faculty study area, very appropriately, of the Health, Physical Education, and Recreation program. And Ernie has been visiting with us these last minutes about some very interesting things, about some of the pioneering he and other people did here at the university in relation to some programs that helped expand the horizons academically and in other ways of the physical education program. The physical education program, as you had it, as you first came here from Nebraska City, was a very modest program, I imagine. There weren't just many courses at all, were there?
No.
What sorts of courses were they?
Just basic courses like, well, to prepare, in those days it was to prepare an individual to go out and be a coach, basically. Because physical education got tossed about. That physical education teachers were accepted. That was basically it was considered the conditioning program for sports. And of course, women physical education, I went along with it, but up to a point where I could help influence the change. But the recreation program was the one that really gave the challenge because so few people understood it.
About what year did we start to move out of that stereotype pattern of he's an athlete, so he's going to be a Phi Ed major and he'll probably be a coach? When did that start to change?
I think basically around here with us, it started in right around the 60s.
So it isn't too many years, about 20, a little over 20 years ago, really.
Well, in fact, when we began our recreation program, if we had been able to have the university adopt it when we started, we would have been about the 10th school in the nation. As it was, about 8 years later, we were the 65th college or university.
We dragged our feet a bit, huh?
To have it.
What were the objections to starting it? Some of them, at least. Why didn't we do it 8 years ago?
Little petty thoughts, thinking it was recreation was physical education, and we didn't need any more of that.
Just a new name for the same thing?
It was a new name for the same thing, but it wasn't. So we began to work with senior citizens, and we began to work in upgrading activities in nursing homes, which were an abominable state in those days. And I used to send students outstate or around the community, surrounding community, to help programs, give them the practical experience. And it kind of grew from there. We started with just a few students, and pretty soon the program just grew. I didn't really want numbers in the program. I wanted quality. And that's one of the things that I stressed all the way through. Keep the quality. Of course, when university programs have to justify themselves in terms of numbers, that was in conflict with philosophies that existed. But I still maintain that quality and a viable program is just as important as the financial dollar.
And I think many educators and students and faculty staff generally would agree with you on that, Ernie.
Yep.
But the hard fact of it is often we get to counting heads a lot of times, don't we?
We count too many heads and we count too many dollars, and we forget about the quality of life.
And the quality of life is perhaps a key to the program as it expanded and changed that you were a part of, really.
I think so.
And when we look around us at this building we're in, at the wonderful things we can do now, that's all a part and parcel of the same basic stuff you were beginning.
Yes, and I had, that's another thing, I had a hand in the planning and development of this building, particularly the recreation phase. And I used the economy sort of thing. We kept it, our phase simple. that there was very little that was ever cut out of it in the plan. Oh, incidentally, that was another thing. I reminisce. Who's now Senator Exon was then governor, and he vetoed the development of this building
Yes.
twice.
Yes.
And it cost the state 3 times as much money to have less of a building.
Mm-hmm. It was a long time a-coming, wasn't it,
Yeah, it
Ernie?
was a long time a-coming. And it was a political maneuver on the senator's part, but
He was then governor, wasn't
he was then governor.
Yeah.
He should never have vetoed it. He vetoed it, saying he was saving the state money, but in the long run, it cost the state money.
Because we had less of a building, although it's wonderful. For the dollars kept going up, and the space kept getting a little smaller, didn't it?
Well, that's kind of like Paul, fellow who, one of the men who was vice president in charge of finances for the university, knocked a couple of proposals in the head that I was involved in because said the university didn't need it and they cost money.
Yeah, and when you mentioned that, one thing that comes to mind was the story about, at one time, the University of Omaha could have, for reasonable dollars, had lots of land between here and 72nd Street. Am I right?
That's correct. The
What happened on all
Ralph
that?
McClintock, superintendent of Parks and Recreation, and I talking about it. The Elmwood Park Golf Course was kind of obsolete because it was built in the early 20s. And it just needed revitalizing. And here was this land just west of the park, and there was just a little narrow corridor the university could have used. But, so I proposed that, it was Ralph and I proposed that here would be a joint cooperative venture. The university could move into Elmwood Park, the city could move the golf course and expand to the west and make the Elmwood Park much more viable.
Ah,
The land, I think, was available for $200 an acre. And
quite a few acres?
I investigated, oh, yes. It went all the way to 72nd Street and almost to Pacific Street.
Is that right?
There was very little housing.
Yeah. We were at the
There
edge
was
of
nothing.
town.
There was
right?
farmland.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I investigated, find out who owned the land and what it could be purchased for. And then told Ralph McClintock, I said, you go to the board. I said, I'm only a person on the staff, and they just kind of laugh at me. I turned it down. But a member of the board and a friend of his pooled their money, bought the land, and a member of the board was Roman Ruska, and his friend became one of Omaha's first multi-million-dollar realtors.
Because the land at $200 an acre went
Built
up
small
and up
housing,
and up.
and from there on he grew.
Mainly housing at first and then commercial. Huh?
And I don't blame them. I wish that I had had foresight to go borrow money with no collateral. I might have been a millionaire.
Yeah. Ernie, when you mention this interesting story out of the history of what might have been, it brings me back to something else I'd like to ask you from time to time as we go along here this morning. You know, when you think of those early years when you were here in the 40s and early 50s, what are some of the names that stand out in terms of the university and people who did things for us and with us that helped not only the athletic program, but the university generally? What were some of the big names on campus and perhaps off?
Do you mean in relation to the faculty and the staff?
Anyone at all. Anyone at all.
I always have a lot of admiration for Dr. Mabel L. He came shortly after Dr. Roland Haynes retired. And he was a builder.
He came not too long after you came.
He came
right?
in
Couple years, right?
1948, I think. It was 1 year was Roland Haynes, and then came Dr. Mabel L. He was a builder. He was a driver. He liked to see people do things, create things. One thing that never once did he pound on the table on his desk at me. We always had a very good relationship, but I know some faculty people didn't like him very well.
There were times when he did pound on the desk.
Oh, he hammered the table, a lot of them, but I can understand because some of those people just didn't do anything. They just went along.
You're mentioning Dr. Bale. He was a strong person, wasn't he?
It was Dr. Bale who called me in his office one day, and he said, I would like to have you give up coaching track so you can develop your recreation major program.
How did that strike you right then?
I had to make a decision that morning. And he was lucky to have gotten a hold of me. But Cardwell was to be no longer football coach, and I think he was trying to find a place, Cardwell, just to be honest.
Sure, sure.
Because he just openly stated it that way. And I thought about all of the years that I'd been coaching. This was in 1961. Thought about all of the years I'd been coaching, giving up weekends and all the things. My wife, yes, I'll do it. So that was the beginning of full-time recreation program.
That's a big change for you.
I still had to continue directing the National Cross Country Championships, though, at his demand.
Yeah.
And I did that until 1967.
You did that a good part of 20 years. 15 at least, wasn't it? Or more. Yeah.
About 15 years.
Yeah.
So I was glad that I did, because those last few years, my wife, Eileen, died suddenly one morning on the steps of the school where she was teaching.
I remember it well.
We had a few good years of weekends and doing things that we wanted without the interference of sports.
But sports had been a large part of your life, hadn't it?
It sure had been. They still are, but I don't bring myself to complete dedication to them anymore. There are other things that are much more valuable. Can I go back a little bit?
Oh, yes, indeed, Ernie.
In relation to Ed Clark, talking about personalities on campus, Ed was a great fellow. He was terrific in drama, and he wanted to start musicals. But he needed male dancers. And anybody who was associated with dancing on stage and this sort of thing, kind of like...
Considered effeminate.
Yes. And so I recruited some football players to learn to dance, and they danced.
I kind of remember that.
The first musical.
Yeah.
And I think that was another breakthrough. We cooperated I cooperated with the drama department terrifically, so that's why I got good cooperation when we had drama as a part of recreation and music. Our program was not just sports, games and sports. It was drama, music, arts and crafts.
What is the first thing you built on in that recreation program? What is the first key to all these additions you have? You went across really collegiate lines here to get the involvement, didn't you?
I had cooperation between departments. And I'd just go to, we used to sit down and talk, and I'd talk to people about what we were doing and the philosophy that this is recreation is living. That is people doing what they don't have to do. That makes their life enjoyable. And that began to hit some good notes.
Well, we've been mentioning names of people, and I think I'll, on our next tape, add some more to it, Ernie, because there are so many people you've known and worked with and worked for as a part of your time, your many years here at the University of Nebraska at Omaha. Did you really miss coaching? Last quick question on this tape.
No, not really.
Because you got so involved in the new thing, huh?
I got so involved in the new thing that I didn't miss it. I began to see a new aspect of life. This dedication to sports was just not quite what people made it to be.
All right. Now, it's time for us to pause again while we load the tape as we continue to record here in the summer of 1982. Now beginning the third segment of my visit with Ernie Gorr. as a part of Reflections in Time here in the summer of 1982. When we were winding up the third tape, Ernie, we were starting to talk about some of the people that stand out in your memory. And sometimes it's hard to think of names. I'll throw in a few, and then you'll think of others. But if you'd reflect on your impressions or stories related to them or anything, one person that comes to mind that's an interesting memory to so many of us, Dr. Wilfred Payne.
Dr. Wilfred Payne was a delightful, controversial, and often misunderstood person. A man who thought that only the student, the philosophy, and the higher intellect was worthwhile.
Mm-hmm.
People who indulged in physical activities and sports were not a very high mental level. I'll just be honest about it. But one day in the old faculty club room in the administration building where we used to gather and talk, and everybody knew one another and understood the cross-section of departments, visitations. I walked in one morning to have a cup of coffee, and there was Dr. Les Garlow and Dr. Wilfred Payne were sitting there and coffee and visiting, and they were the only ones in the room, and so I asked if I might sit down with them, because Les Garlow and biology and we had quite a bit of work together in my business of cutting across programs. Dr. Payne had made some statement about something in music, and I was sitting there not offering anything in the conversation, but I couldn't help but interject the fact that I didn't agree with what he was stating. And he turned around and glared at me and started to make some statement, and Dr. Les Garlow reached over and he says, "Wilfred, the man knows what he's talking about. He's been a professional musician." And the change that came over to Dr. Payne's face was, it's visible to me today. Look at me, I'm up and down, you in physical activities, games, sports, musician. I said, yeah, also drama, also arts and crafts. And so I became one of those outside friends of his who belonged in a different world with which he would communicate.
Another name that comes to mind, the man you mentioned is a part of that story, and I remember him well, too, Dr. Garlow.
Oh, he's a great fellow. Had a great sense of humor. Always laughed. People, the students just loved him. He made biology live.
Yes, he did. Harold Kiefover.
Harold Kiefover. Harold was a student when I came here.
Was he really?
Yes, and then we graduated and went into the business administration office and grew with the university.
And with his physical handicaps happening at a late age, it was remarkable what he did, wasn't it?
You never knew that he had a handicap. He just offset it.
You mentioned Dr. Bale. Dr. Haynes, who hired you, what are your memories of him?
They're rather dim, because I didn't have too much contact with him outside of the day that I interviewed him, and then we had some conversations at different times, but I think he knew that he was quitting the university, and after he had retired, he went downhill rapidly in health, and it was kind of sad to see such a virile man just go downhill, and I understand that's what's happened to Dr. Payne. Maybe it'll happen to me, but I don't intend to let it happen. I intend to live a very active life. I hope to see the year 2000, because I want to see what the change is in the century.
Speaking of change, as we sit here in this beautiful room in the one of the newest buildings on our expanding campus, I'd like to have you reflect a little on change. Now, in a physical way, you mentioned, I think, in the early segments of our time together, the small campus in terms of buildings and how it's grown. You remember some of the changes that have taken place that are the largest ones in your life as you look at the university?
Yes. The physical growth, the building growth on campus, and what is now the where the university administration is housed.
Yes.
It was in the epicenter, and that was built as a library, and it was built on tennis courts.
Remember the tennis courts, yeah.
One of the things that a lot of people forgot, that some of this land, there was a stream flowing through here, and it was kind of boggy land, and it was fill land.
Was it, did it have a name, a creek of certain proportions and name?
Well, a friend of mine who lived through here for a long time told me, I've forgotten what the name of the creek was.
Can't we still see evidence of it when we walk across this little bridge down here as we go to the main
In fact, out
building?
on the football field in the southeast corner, there's covered up a huge roller, a heavy roller.
What's it doing down there?
It got sunk in the mud, and it cost too much to take it out in the WPA days, so they covered it up.
Was that when they were making the stadium?
That's when they were making the stadium.
Well, that was an interesting episode in life. I'm glad you mentioned that.
Still there out in the southeast corner.
When did they build the football field and the stadium? When was that added to all of this?
That was in the WPA days, long before me. And
So that was all here when you came?
No stands here.
Right.
The track was there.
Yeah.
And then when they built the field house, another thing that we had some those torrential rains one summer, and I think it was in the month of June. I think it was in 48. And the torrential rains, and there was no place for all of that rain to come off the field house roof, and it flowed down the concrete, and all the drainage couldn't take care of it, and it flooded the track and washed out the cinders, and so we lost one of the best cinder tracks in the area. Of course, cinder tracks today are obsolete anyway.
Any other changes physically? Of course, you'd relate so carefully to the field house, but all the other changes, the student center, all these things have been added since.
Oh, yes, all the student center, what was called the engineering building then, that's where I think your headquarters were housed.
Even before engineering, it was called Applied Arts.
It was Applied Arts.
Carl Helmstetter as dean.
An interesting reflection in the building. They keep it in the campus design. They put the main entrance on the north side, and they had a narrow entrance on the east side for the students to flow to class. And the buildings were all there, and there was nothing but a human jam of traffic.
We've done a lot of that on this campus, haven't we?
Never bothering to think, what is the natural flow of how they go?
I think in more recent years, those things have been improved a bit.
I think they have.
As the campus has expanded.
I know we used to have, we lost intramural fields with the building on campus, so things like the tennis courts and things, the field still exists, but it never was adequate. I think they play soccer, and women play it on the field once in a while, women's athletic field. But today the change is that the women have a chance to do all of the things too.
Yes.
There's no, it's a balance, which is as it should be.
One of the things that I wanted to ask you about, Ernie, that was a major change for all of us that were here through that period, was the merger of this university into the University of Nebraska system. How do you feel about that, and how did it affect you and yours?
It didn't bother us a bit, because our recreation program, we were working with the University of Nebraska at Lincoln, the Lincoln campus, early, because we felt that they had an outstate reach that we didn't have. We were metropolitan in our recreation program. And the idea was that the two could work together. And I was never one to object to it, although there were a lot of people on campus that were.
Yes.
And I strongly supported it, and I was really glad to see it happen, even though I hated to see the old University of Omaha go. I hated to see the city get by with an attitude that the University of Omaha was nothing, and another school like Creighton was the school, which was actually a philosophy that existed. We changed a lot of that. We got it
Yes.
out of the West Dodge High attitude. We made it a viable university, and it grew, but still the city wouldn't support it, so it had to go into the state system, which was a trend around other parts of the country.
Yes. We were one of the last of what we
No,
might
we
have
were
called municipal universities.
I
Right?
think we were one of the last, right.
Ernie, now you've been retired for a little while, a few years.
6 years.
Yeah. But you keep attachments. I see you on campus, and you're involved with social things and relate to people on campus. Generally, is retirement what you'd hoped it would be?
Well, as a recreation professor, part of the thing was to prepare for retirement, so I was fully ready. And
What are some of the things you did to get ready?
Just to have a philosophy of doing the things that you never really had time to do when you were involved actively, professionally, or had little time to do as much of them. And so those things I have enjoyed terrifically every minute. We've traveled. We went back to Europe last fall, kind of recapture some of the places that when I taught in Europe in '75.
One thing you didn't include so far, and you're talking about it, just blended in, is that you remarried again.
Oh, that happened in 1967. I met a delightful woman who was Register of Deeds in Sarpy County at the time, and we married in December of 1966, so it's been a long time.
Yes,
We've enjoyed a second marriage.
Well, Lois, you have traveled a lot, I know that.
Yes.
That's been part of your retirement life, hasn't it? You also love golf, as I do.
Oh, sure.
You're involved with that, so you're into sports still, aren't you?
Particularly the golf, but I am not adverse to bridge, and I am not adverse to sitting down and playing at the organ at home for an hour or two. I enjoyed it. Last night it was about 1 o'clock, and Lois said, "Ernie, it's time to come to bed." I've been playing it for about an hour.
Now, as you reflect on these many years of fruitful activity here at our University of Omaha, University of Nebraska at Omaha, as you look back on it, and if you were going to capsulize it all into sort of one or two big things, what are the things that are of major satisfaction to you of your life as a professor and as a coach?
That's one of the most difficult questions you could have asked me this morning. You better go through some more segments of tape.
Do what you can, Ernie.
I think the opportunity to prepare a recreation major program and to instill the philosophy of living among people, how to enjoy life and enjoy the things that they do, not to ignore the past, but to build upon it and to enjoy. Well, people have accused me of being slow on a number of occasions. I do it deliberately because I do not believe in high-speed living. I think we go by too many things too fast, and we fail to reflect on just what life is all about.
Ernie, that's a nice way to close. We wish you and Lois, your good wife, well, and we look forward to visiting again. But thank you so much for all your observations on the university and on life generally. And I think contributions such as yours will long be remembered as a part of the education program here, and more specifically, the School of Health, Physical Education, and Recreation.
Paul, I'm glad to have had the opportunity. I came to the university to make a contribution. It wasn't for Ernie Gorr, it was for the university and for the city, and that's what I like about living, to make contributions to life to help people live a better life.
A nice note on which to end. Thank you, Ernie, for being a part of Reflections in Time in the summer of 1982.